Okay, so today what we're going to be discussing is logo design and how to create a logo. We will be joined by Josh Dickinson, likely in a little bit during class. And I wanted to discuss kind of quickly the designs that we had from last week, which was the paper robot challenge. So I'm going to share my screen here. And last week we had some pretty cool robot designs here. We have Bolt over here, and we have this other Gilbreth and Taylorism Ergonomics Challenge. And this one is called Mr. Green Tea. And I wanted to discuss a little bit about the value of learning how to create things and being mindful of other individuals so that they're able to interact with it on a higher level, which is really the purpose of user experience design. We want to think about the people that we're designing things for, and we want to make it as frictionless as possible. And so what we want to do is try to get into the mindset of other individuals to help them through the process. And that activity is kind of cool, where you're creating a robot and you're thinking about the steps and you're telling somebody just from a piece of paper how to go through it and design this robot. That's really the real genesis of that idea. Today we have a few different things. So one, we placed them onto Instructables, and Instructables is this cool website where you can go and there's people who are essentially teaching other individuals how to do things by instructions. Another is something along the lines of like a GitHub, where people are putting things into a repository of how to develop an app or how to add something to another app. And one of the most crucial components of GitHub is the README file. So what they are doing is they're putting a README file on there to tell other people how to do stuff. And there's a real art and skill set and need and demand in the marketplace for people to break down what it is to create something and how other people replicate it. So that was the importance of that activity. And it looks like a bunch of people created really cool examples from that. So moving forward to today, what we're going to discuss is simplicity in design and the anatomy of design and how to create logos and icons, and kind of looking at things from a granular level, starting from the basics of just a single image and how do we add simplicity to that image, or a set of small images. And I think icons are a great way to look at things in order to do that. So I'm going to pull up this presentation here. On Prezi. And let me check real fast. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment area. And I'll try to answer those questions in the comment area as well. So here is my screen here on icon design. So starting off, we talk about things like design mistakes, things that you want to try to avoid doing when you're starting to create a design. One of the that you don't want your icons to be too similar to each other, because then individuals are looking at the icon and they can't differentiate what the meaning of one icon is towards another icon. Without previous experience or a better understanding, it'll be difficult for a user to understand the difference between those two icons that we're looking at. So always think that your audience has no idea about your interface or the object your interface connects with. The next part is maintain elegance. So in the image that we have to the right is home, and the image that we have to the left is also home, right? And so while the image to the right is a cool image showing different planes and going from, the back of the site essentially to the front to try to signify home, just showing a house to demonstrate home is an easier way to navigate things around. So use as few objects as possible in the design of your logo. Lack of unity. So when you're creating icons, also think about all the icons that are going to be part of the common whole within your app that you're developing or your design that you're developing. And think how those icons are going to relate to each other. So you see here in this picture that there's a lack of unifying style. Elements that can help unify a style are color, shape, font, edges, size, and background. In this case, we're looking at these icons and it's a bit dated. So there's a little bit of a retro feel. So they do have that unifying element based off of that. But you can imagine back in its day that there was really nothing to unify them without the kind of the datedness of the icons themselves. Don't add unnecessary elements. So in this case, what we have are 5 different icons for a database. One is to add a database, one is to remove the database, search the database, database administrator, and save the database. In those cases, you could just remove the little pill icon and just have the plus minus search and admin logo and save logo instead. And here we have the example of the difference between those logos, and it's much more clear. And the pill database image behind it doesn't really provide much context or much help for what we're looking for. And make sure to double check. So here's an example of an icon library where they put a check mark on each one of the different icons for it. Don't try to be too original with your metaphor. And so here we have an example of an icon of a Jack in the Box for jumping out of the the computer, the old school Mac. And then the next we have just a game controller, and they're both trying to talk about a game. So be simplistic with your metaphor and try to stick, you're best off trying to stick with icons that already exist. We'll look afterwards about frameworks. And we talked about that today in the advanced web class when we talked about things like Bootstrap and Foundation and Material.io, which are these frameworks that are built that people are using to build web applications. It's better to use those as 99% out of the time, you're going to be better off using something that's already tried and true and already been through the funneling process of your users to understand and probably to have used an icon like that with a similar type of meaning, rather than trying to create something brand new and re-educate your user. Starting off, you really want to try to not re-educate your user as much as possible. So check with what people are used to. Try not to place text inside of icons. Try not to make your icons too complex is essentially what it is. And text is often one of those things where it's an easy get. And these are some examples of text within icons. And you could look at iTunes over the years, how that icon changed, all the way to the point where I think all they have is a music note at the end. And so not using text and trying to think about how do I create an icon without text and how do I visualize what it is that I'm trying to visualize. If it is, and with text, if it's too small, it's hard to read that text as well. Direct text hurts the ability to create a visual identity as well. Unless your visual identity is your text itself, which might be the case in certain instances, but rarely the case actually. Most people try to identify their company with some type of symbolic nature. When designing an icon for your application, think about it, right? Spend some time researching, thinking about other items. In graphic visualization, we really kind of get down to what are different items to think about? How do we create a library of ideas and then facilitate a streamlined process to make a decision in order to design things like icons and create a simplified version of something that has a deeper meaning or could have a deeper meaning over time. Make the icon work seamlessly with the interface of your application. Think about where that icon is going to be placed later on and where its impact is going to be in the overall holistic value of the application that you're trying to create. They do not function on their own, and all the icons work as a group to create a general understanding of the necessary available operations. If you need to draw several icons, you need to think over the images for the whole set of icons before proceeding with the illustrating activities. Think about the language of the design you are styling. So think about what you're creating as a language that you're communicating to your audience, not just the icons, but the entire application as a whole. And think about the way that they're going to interact with that and what is the best type of language you want to have with that. As an example is, think about, and we'll get into this later, where we really break down what a demographic is and thinking about demographics. But if you're thinking about your audience, who is that audience that's going to be using it and what language fits with them best? For example, if you have an older audience, you're going to want to be really simplistic, really didactic with how you're dilating your ideas. Rather than if you have a younger audience, you have more flexibility. You know they're going to kind of live in that environment and they're going to understand it as its own little world. So you can play a little bit more and you don't have to be as with big icons and really literal with what you're trying to do. Plan ahead of where it's going to go. And as we're saying, consider the audience, as some visualizations are totally different than others. You're seeing in one picture, the Australia picture is a warning message, while the USA is an exclamation point. Careful about scale. Think about where the icon will be placed. And here we have another thing to consider is you want to make your icons vectors. Vectors look good big and small, but bitmaps only really look good small. So if you're making your icon with Photoshop, be careful. These days, you really want to try to make your icon an SVG so it can grow and compress. And the best thing to use for that are things like Adobe XD, Figma, or Illustrator that create vector files. Well, Photoshop is going to create a raster file. And therefore, when you start stretching it, it doesn't really hold the same dimensionality and fidelity of that icon as it grows and expands. And that's based on that vectors are designed with an algorithm, while bitmaps are built based off of the pixels, essentially. Realism is still pretty trendy. So this is actually an older presentation that I created, but realism is still kind of cool. It depends on your design or your icon design, and try to do some research and figure out what is popular, what is the trend, what are things that people are looking for. And I'll release a video later that we did with Liliana Velasquez where we covered some of the trends in UX design. And you'll see some of the most recent things. And just Googling will give you a good idea, or going through like a Pinterest or an Instagram and looking at other designers and seeing what they're doing. Pictograms are still popular if they're really good and if they fit the purpose that you're trying to do. Flat is really hot. Flat's been really hot for a while. It's about time for some type of trend change actually with those. And one of the proponents of it, Google, had went flat as well. So the question is when will it jump the shark? When will it no longer be as popular? And what is next? Some older fashions are beginning to get confusing. This is a floppy disk. This is what save used to mean. If you show this to the younger generation, they might not even know what a floppy disk is at this point. So be careful at what you're trying to use as an icon and make sure that it's not too dated. Different will always be cool. Sometimes different is cool, but you do want to also try to use, once again, what's most common. And I'll show some of those. Just don't be too different. And here's another icon where there's cats in a toilet, for example, and they're doing all sorts of different meanings there. Okay. Looking in the chat, can icons have a copyright so we can't use specific icons? They could at times. It depends your use case for it. So if you're using it in an application that's a commercial application and the icon that you're using is like a logo or something like that, then yeah, in the most part, you're pretty safe most of the time. I would say. And I'll show you some tools that you could look at to find icons that are not, that you will not be breaking any copyrights for. Yeah, and I know some of you have to pay. Sometimes that's the case, yes. So I'll show you some examples of, so Font Awesome is something that's pretty cool. And they're essentially an icon library. If you're building websites, they give you the code, so you could actually just take it directly from their server. And they have tons and tons of icons. If you click over here, and you can see all these icons that you could use here. So you could even go and look at their icons for some of the stuff you're using and find a library of icons you want to use. Actually, Confu, to your point, some people do create icon libraries that are for sale. So if you do use theirs without their explicit, saying that you can or buying it, yeah, I think you would be in trouble for copyright, actually, especially if they just created them for sale along those lines. And sometimes it's worthwhile to pay for an icon library as well, depending on what you're trying to do. But you can see here, there's just tons and tons of them that are free. And if you click on them here, they give you different sizes, and they give you the embed code as well to incorporate them into your web pages. So that's one option. Another option I was referring to is Bootstrap. And Bootstrap was originally created by Twitter. Now it's free. It's been its own thing for quite a while. They also have icons that they use that you could use on your site. And Bootstrap is one of the most popular web frameworks there is on the internet. So these will be pretty similar to other applications or other websites that you're using. And then another one is Material.io, which is created by Google. And this is a really good one to use because anybody that's familiar with, let me click on icons actually, familiar with Google will be familiar with the icons you're using. So if they're the icons within your app, within your menu bars and stuff like that, this is a great option. And this option here is also going to make it show that your app is extremely professional, similar to Google, right? And it's going to fit in with their design style and stuff. And you can also get Apple icons as well and use those as well. So those are some options. So I do recommend using those type of icons. For today, I kind of want you to think about creating your own icon because, of course, the logo or the brand is going to have its own unique icon. Could you use one of these? You could potentially, but let's try to think about creating a unique one for a brand and the type of thought that goes into that. So that's kind of the activity for today. But when you start building out your app, go back to these resources and use these. I highly recommend it. And you'll thank yourself later. Don't overthink things. Just use these and your app is going to have a glisten and a sheen that comes off very professional to other individuals because that's what they're used to. If you create something brand new, it's not that it's not great. It's just they're not familiar with it. And because they're familiar with these others, they already kind of assess it at a higher value chain when they see it. And they're like, wow, you know how to make icons like Google, and they don't realize you're actually just using the Google icons or the Apple icons and that kind of stuff. So that's the majority of what we have for our discussion about icons. In addition, and I'll put the links to it in the video, this week, there's a wonderful video by David Pogue, and he talks about simplicity in TED Talk. It's an old one, but it's really good. And he's on the piano. It's almost like a Broadway play, the way that he makes it. And he talks about old school Microsoft designs and some of the complexities that happened when they created the first design. And then it became really popular. They had difficulty changing because all their users were used to it. So they had to kind of massage and modify. And it wasn't until many years later that they updated their design style. So it's a really great introduction to design and designing icons and thinking about some of the icons of other individuals. And then I also recommend reading the article on Simple and Usable as well that talks about design stuff. And then after that, do some research and find 2 designs that you feel are unique and emphasize simplicity of navigation and use references in the reading and the lecture. And then on a document, write a few sentences why you feel those designs exude simplicity and how they were able to solve a complicated process with a quick path to solution. So kind of a research exercise to look for. And if you want to start thinking about designing one yourself, please go ahead. And if you just want to sketch it, that's cool. Or if you want to use one of those other tools, that would be great as well. So that's about what I have for you guys today. Does anybody have any questions?